If you have any more questions for Matilda, please ask on the Discord channel. She will be around to answer your questions. Um, we are just waiting for our next speaker and then we can start the next talk. So our next speaker is Nimish Subramaniam from Azim Premji University, Bangalore, India. They are going to talk about an arachnid's guide to being an ant, morphological and behavioral mimicry in ant mimicking spiders. The floor is yours, Nimish.
Uh, Thank you for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nimish from India, and today I'm going to be talking about a study which was part of my undergraduate thesis from Azim Premji University, which looks into the double life that a spider leads. And so let me begin by showing you a small clip of an animal walking across a table. And I would like you to look closely at this animal and try to guess which animal it could be. So here's the clip. It looked familiar, right? It looked like an ant, a sight that we have seen probably a lot of times in our lives. But actually, it's not an ant, but a spider that's only pretending to be an ant, which is crazy. And this is the system which we will be talking about and dealing with today, which involves three key players, which is a mimic, the ant that it's mimicking, and its non-mimetic relative of the spider. So the mimic that we are looking at is a jumping spider called Myrmaplata plataleoides, which is a known Batesian mimic of a model of the weaver ant Oecophylla smaragdina. And now, why on earth would a jumping spider need to look like an ant? Well, if you have seen weaver ants, which are a common sight in India, they are known for their aggressive behavior and noxiousness, and in general, for those reasons, are avoided by predators. So, if by mimicking an ant, this jumping spider is essentially gaining the same protection that the ant has, despite being not being inherently harmful. And as you can see from these pictures, the mimetic jumping spider does not look anything like its non-mimetic relative and has evolved a series of morphological and behavioral adaptations in order to better resemble an ant. And this includes things like looking at like its slender constricted abdomen, long elongated slender legs that kind of resemble those of ants. Even studies have even shown that these mimics mimic the behavior of ants. A classic example being raising and waving its front legs to mimic the antennal movement of ants. And the most fascinating thing about this is that ants and spiders as lineages have evolved independently for hundreds of millions of years. So you can imagine the kind of drastic changes the mimic will have to undergo, both morphological or behavioral, in order to successfully pull off the disguise of an ant. Which leads us to the main question of our study, which is what exactly does it take for a spider to become an ant? And to what extent do these mimics resemble their model ants? And is there a way to quantify their degree of resemblance? And in order to do so, we focused on three features, which is body shape, leg size, and speed movement, all of which have previous studies have shown to play a key role in mimicry. So the first part we'll be talking about is body shape, and we use a technique known as geometric morphometrics in order to quantify how similar are the body shapes of mimics and model ants, and how different they are from non-mimetic spiders. So to give you a brief intro to geometric morphometrics, changes to body plan can either be size driven or shape driven. And what I mean by that is, let's consider an animal with an oval body plan. And let's say if I were to squeeze this oval body plan along these 2 points, I would get a circle in the end. And these two body plans are different, but it's a simple matter of rescaling this original oval body plan, which leads to a different conformation, which is the circular body plan. And so in this case, the difference between these two body plans is size based. And in contrast, let's say I have the same oval body plan, and let's say if I were to convert it into a squarish body plan, for instance, no amount of simple rescaling or squeezing or stretching would result in an oval turning into a square. You would have to meticulously use a hammer in order to change the oval body plan to a squarish body plan. And so in this instance, the difference between these two body plans is shape driven or shape based. And this is extremely relevant in the case of mimicry, because as you can see, the body of a non-mimetic jumping spider, which comprises of 8 legs and 2 segmented body, also is starkly different from that of a weaver ant, which has 6 legs and a constricted slender body and 2 antennae. And so in order for the mimic to basically successfully pull off this act of deception, it would have to make drastic changes to its body plan. So we wanted to quantify that, and there are two approaches in geometric morphometrics. One is landmark based, and another is semi-landmark based. We did both of these analysis, but in the interest of time, I will only focus on the semi-landmark based analysis. So what we did was we basically placed 120 equidistant points along the outlines of non-mimics, mimics, and model lands. And we rescaled them and removed the effect of size or normalized for size using progressive superimposition. And we got these rescaled outlines. So the gray dots here represent individual outlines of all the specimens we observed. And the black bold outline represents the mean body outline of these 3 different body outlines. And using these rescaled outlines, we subjected these rescaled outlines to a PCA-based relative warp analysis. And what we got was basically that we found that the 3 groups, which is mimics, non-mimics represented by blue, mimics represented by red, and the weaver ant represented by yellow, showed clear separation along the PC1 axis, which accounted for about 76% of the variation in the group. And the second thing was, if you imagine a spectrum, on one end of which lies the body outline of a non-mimetic jumping spider, and on the other end lies the body outline of a weaver ant, then mimics fell somewhere in between those two. They were different, distinct from both these outlines. And but one would assume, given if you remember those pictures, that mimic would be much more closer to ants or something similar. But in this case, mimics are different from both of them, but they are somewhere in between in terms of body shape for between non-mimics and model ants. So for body shape, mimics are intermediate. What about their leg size? So that was the second feature that we decided to focus on. And if going back to these images, if you look at the legs of the mimicking spider, they are again quite different from the stout, thick legs of a non-mimetic jumping spider, and have evolved to be much more slender and longer in order to resemble the legs of an ant. So, so to quantify leg size, what we did was we focused on leg parts that were common to all the 3 organisms, which is femur, tibia, and tarsus. And for each individual leg, and for each of these parts, we took the length is to width ratio and subjected these ratios to a simple principal component analysis. And what we found was this. So I'll be presenting 2 sets of results here, one for the right foreleg and one for the right hind leg. Now, in both these cases, if you can see, mimics, non-mimics, mimics, and weaver ants show clear separation along the PC1 axis, which in both cases account for much of the variation observed between the groups. And mimics, once again, also in terms of leg size, fall somewhere in between non-mimics and weaver ants. And another thing to notice, if you see in case of forelegs, uh, we find that there is higher interspecific variation within for leg size for forelegs as compared to hind legs. And this could be because perhaps hind legs are used primarily for jumping, and hence in jumping spiders, it would be much more conserved a much more conserved trait. So there is only a little room where it can serve both functions, where it can help in jumping as well as successfully mimic the leg of an ant. Forelegs, on the other hand, are primarily used for walking or for antennal illusion, and so they are not under similar constraints as hind legs are. And both these limbs differential selection could be acting on both these limbs in this case. And this trend was observed for consistent for all the organisms, all the legs that we observed. So when it comes to morphology, based on body shape and leg size, mimics are in between non-mimics and weaver ants. But what about behavior? Now, if you remember the video I showed you in the beginning of the presentation, that movement kind of resembled uh, quite looked like that it was an ant moving across a table and not a spider. So we decided to focus on the movement of the mimic and wanted to see if it was close to that of an ant or not. And so we focused on the speed of their movement. And what we did was we recorded videos of non-mimics, mimics, and weaver ants walking across an arena. And using tracking software, we obtained the trajectories. And using those trajectories, we calculated the median speed. And what we found was that the speed of mimics, which is the red box here, is comparable to that of a weaver ant following pheromone trail and is significantly different from that of a non-mimetic spider. And this could be attributed to the fact that the nature of movement of mimics and model ants differs starkly from that of a non-mimic, where both mimics and model ants show continuous, long, uninterrupted movements, whereas the movement of a non-mimic is characterized by short bursts of walk and jumps interspersed with long stationary periods. And to sum it all together, we find that mimics are morphologically, from a morphological perspective, mimics are in between weaver ants and non-mimics, and they are better at mimicking certain parts of the ants' features, such as movement, than they are at mimicking leg size and overall body shape. And previous studies from our lab as well as elsewhere have shown that these traits that we looked at are actually effective in deterring predators. So, but maybe it might be the case that not all traits contribute equally to this act of deception. For instance, if you are moving fast enough, a higher degree of morphological resemblance may not be necessary. So, and in such cases, speed of the movement might be compensating for any inconsistencies observed in the morphological features or morphological resemblance to ants. So this suggests that each mimetic trait might be differential selection pressures might be acting on each of these mimetic traits. And so our guide basically tells us that to be a good mimic, you do not have to chase perfection, but it is the interplay of various diverse mimetic traits that drive a successful act of deception. And so part of this study was carried out during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we would like to thank our friends and family for their constant support. We'd like to thank Azim Premji University for logistical support and funding this project, as well as the Animal Behavior Live Organizing Committee for this wonderful opportunity. So with this, I say thank you, and we can open it up for questions.
Thank you, Nimish. Fascinating talk, very thorough set of analysis. While we wait for questions from the YouTube chat, I'm wondering if you know if of species of spiders where the both mimicking and non-mimicking populations, or are any
No,
like it's a 1-0 thing?
it's a one thing.
Okay.
The species itself is mimicking.
Okay, so there are no populations that are sort of in between.
No.
We have a few congratulatory messages on YouTube chat, but we're still waiting for questions. In the meantime, I guess I will ask a few. So, you
Yes.
mentioned that that you were looking at the PCA in the leg size, right? And
Yeah.
to me, it seemed that the variation in the leg size for ants was much higher than for the spiders. Do you know why this would be the case?
So it could be because of allotropy, because ants have Their size is dependent on the kind of mutation and their body size. It's highly correlated. So that could be the possible case of variation in ants.
Okay.
The
Um,
matrix.
okay. There's one question in the YouTube chat. Lucy asks if the model and the mimic occupy the same ecological niche, and she says
Yes,
it's a
they
very
do.
interesting talk.
Yes, they do occupy because it's dependent on whether the predators themselves have been exposed to the noxiousness of the ants, and that's what will drive a successful mimicry in spiders. So both models and ants have kind of need to be in the same ecological species.
So, just continuing on from that, has anyone looked at the predation pressure on these spiders and compared it to, say,
Yeah,
for example, the ants?
Uh, compared it with ants, I'm not sure, but they have looked into how predation pressure affects mimicry and sort of how there's this whole spectrum of mimetic resemblance. So some of them are very lousy mimics, inaccurate mimics, and there are some which mimic a model and extremely perfectly. So in those terms, they have been explained. That has been explained.
Very good. I think we're still waiting for if there are more questions on the chat. Um, so I had one more question on the
Yes.
landmark part that you on the
Yeah.
semi-landmark part that you mentioned. So you
Yeah.
used a two-dimensional model to compare
Yes.
the three different
Yeah.
types. Do you think you would get better insights if you use a three-dimensional model, or it doesn't make so much of a difference?
You might get better is not might get a much more deeper insight into if you use the 3D morphometrics. But in terms of basically the story we are telling, in which if you are being exposed, if you're a predator and you're looking down at a mimic, the 3D features are not going to be that important because it's mostly going to be a silhouette or sort of a small tiny thing that's going across uh, the field or an area. And there have also been studies that have shown that the predators respond to 2D silhouettes of mimicking spiders where they avoid these spiders as opposed to other non-mimetic spiders. So in that way, 2D morphometrics kind of tells the story, but you could always go for 3D.
Very good. Um, I had one more question on the last part where we were talking about
Yeah.
the speed calculation, right?
Yes.
Actually, I had two questions, but maybe there's one question in the chat, so I'll ask that and then we can go to mine. So Sheetal asked if there's any behavior noted in these mimicking spiders where they attack the model ant themselves.
Sorry, I couldn't.
if
I didn't get.
if the mimicking spiders, if they show any behaviors in which they attack the model ant themselves.
No. So not this mimic. So because this is a more of morphological and behavioral mimic, if it approaches an ant colony, it's gonna be attacked by the ants. But there are these chemical mimics that sort of resemble the chemical signature of more the ants they are mimicking, and those ants sort of go stay within the colonies and hunt on the ants and sort of live them. So, but not this mimic. Yeah.
Yeah, she adds that the few mimicking spiders in Europe that attack and feed on the model ants. So that is
Hmm.
why she was asking
Uh,
these two. Um, okay, I think we are nearly there. I think I have time for one last question from my side. Actually, two separate questions. I'm not sure I got the difference between on trail and off trail
yeah.
in the figure that you showed.
So weaver ants follow a pheromone trail when they move. So we decided to look at the speeds both while they were following a pheromone trail and while in the absence of a trail when they were walking.
So in some sense, these are two different ecological contexts, right? One is
Yeah.
they are, say, searching for food, or the other one they are going back home or going to the
Yeah.
food that they know.
Yeah.
Um, have you also looked at other aspects of the movement pattern, like say turning, how much they turn, or the sinuosity of
No, we
the?
haven't.
Okay.
We wanted to, but we couldn't.
Okay. But it's
Yeah.
very cool and very nice results. I think that is all the time that we have